I found my mother-in-law's belongings in my bedroom closet. But they sold their house 3 months ago. The spare key versus the new lock. It's about control. And they thought I was the weak one? They were wrong. I didn't just change the locks. I went to see a lawyer. If your in-laws treated your home like a free hotel, what would you do? My name is Rebecca, and 2 years ago, I thought I had the perfect life. David and I lived in our dream suburban home, white picket fence and all. We'd been married for 2 years, and everything seemed picture perfect. His parents, Martha and George, would visit occasionally to help out. Martha would use the spare key we'd given them for emergencies, rearranging my kitchen cabinets to make things more convenient. "I'm just trying to help, honey," she'd say with that smile that never quite reached her eyes. But something felt off in my own house. Have you ever felt like a guest in your own home? The visits started getting more frequent. From weekly to daily, items from their house began appearing in hours. A lamp here, some dishes there. When I asked David about it, he'd just shrug. "They're just being helpful parents, Rebecca. You're overthinking this." Maybe I was overreacting. They just wanted to help, right? But then I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Martha had made copies of our spare key. How many keys did they actually have? Would you let someone copy your house keys without asking? Then I found the security camera footage. My neighbor had installed cameras after a break-in on our street, and the angle captured our front door perfectly. There they were, Martha and George, letting themselves into my house while I was at work. Martha rearranging my personal items, George using my home office like it was his own. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, mentioned it casually over the fence. "Your parents sure visit a lot when you're not home." Parents. She thought they were my parents. "This is our house too now," Martha had said during dinner last week. I thought it was just a slip of the tongue, but now I knew better. Then I found the real estate listing online. They had secretly sold their house. They sold their house, but never told us. The truth hit me like a freight train. Martha and George approached David privately the next day. "We need somewhere to stay," Martha said, her voice taking on that manipulative tone I was beginning to recognize. They'd sold their house below market value for quick cash, and now they had nowhere to go. David agreed without even consulting me. "Has your spouse ever made a major decision without asking your opinion? But here's what they didn't know about me. I'm not just some housewife they could steamroll. I'm a financial advisor with a law degree, and I handle high-net-worth clients who've dealt with toxic family situations before. I learned a long time ago, growing up with my controlling grandmother, that sometimes you have to fight fire with fire." Looking at myself in the bathroom mirror that night, I saw something I hadn't seen in months: determination. I'd been quiet and compliant for too long. The next morning, they showed up with moving trucks. Not one truck, 3 trucks, filled with furniture, boxes, and a lifetime of junk. Martha walked into my house like she owned it, directing the movers with military precision. "We're going to work you to the bone from now on," George announced, settling into my favorite chair like a king claiming his throne. They weren't asking to stay. They were taking over. They immediately established house rules. Dinner at 5 sharp, no loud TV after 8. Martha would handle the grocery shopping because young people don't know how to budget properly. George needed the home office for his important business calls. This wasn't a temporary stay. This was a hostile takeover. But I appeared compliant. "Yes, Martha, of course, George." Inside, I was building my case. Every boundary they crossed, every rule they imposed, every invasion of my privacy, I documented it all. Photos, audio recordings, witnesses. Sometimes silence is the best strategy. Do you agree? See, what they didn't realize is that my law school training never left me. My current job as a financial advisor means I work with lawyers, real estate agents, and private investigators daily. I have connections, resources, and most importantly, I know how to build an airtight legal case. During my previous relationship with a controlling ex, I learned one crucial lesson. Document everything before you take action. I had a separate bank account David didn't know about, connections he'd never met, and a support network that extended far beyond our shared social circle. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, became my witness. My sister Lisa provided emotional support and a backup plan. My best friend Amanda offered practical help with legal proceedings. They could see what David couldn't or wouldn't. Do you know that the law protects you even from family members? But David was under pressure too. "They're my parents, Rebecca," he'd plead. I was watching my husband get torn between his loyalty to his parents and his commitment to me. The worst part? I was starting to see the patterns from his childhood, the emotional manipulation, the financial control, the way Martha made him feel guilty for any independence. Martha wasn't just taking over our house, she was reclaiming her son. The real plan was more sinister than I'd imagined. This wasn't about needing a place to stay temporarily. Martha wanted permanent residence with me as the live-in caretaker. George's financial troubles ran deeper than a simple house sale. There were gambling debts, tax liens, and creditors circling like vultures. David had been manipulated since childhood, the golden child who could never say no to his parents, even when it meant sacrificing his marriage. The spare key copying wasn't impulsive. It was planned from our wedding day. The house sale was timed perfectly with my busy season at work when I'd be too distracted to notice. Even David wasn't fully aware of how deep this went. The visits weren't random. They were reconnaissance missions. Every helpful rearrangement was them learning our routines, our vulnerabilities, our weak spots. Martha had been studying me for 2 years, waiting for the perfect moment to make her move. But here's what they didn't count on. My compliance wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Every demand they made was documented, recorded, and witnessed. While they thought they were breaking me down, I was building the legal foundation to destroy them. You see, I knew something they didn't. I'd been planning this for months. Then came the ultimatum. Martha cornered me in the kitchen while David was at work. "You'll take care of us, or you'll lose David," she said, her mask finally slipping completely. "He'll choose his family over some girl he's known for a few years." George started receiving mail at our address. Utility bills were transferred to our account without permission. They were establishing legal residency, making it harder to remove them later. Our house became their house in every conversation, but my compliance had been perfect acting. Every single violation was documented with timestamps, photos, and witnesses. I'd been building a legal case while appearing completely helpless. Then they made their fatal mistake. They changed the locks without permission, locking me out of my own house when I came home from work. My keys didn't work. My own front door was barred to me. David stood in the doorway looking defeated. Martha smirked from behind him. "We're protecting our investment," she said. That's when I delivered the line that would change everything. "Enough is enough. I've been to see a lawyer." The silence that followed was deafening. Martha's face went white. George actually stumbled backward. David's mouth fell open. They were speechless because they'd just realized they weren't dealing with a victim anymore. They thought they'd cornered me, but they had no idea how far ahead I'd been planning. That legal consultation? It wasn't recent. I'd been meeting with attorneys for months, building a case they never saw coming. The cease and desist orders were already prepared. Property rights documentation was complete. Security company protocols were in place. While they thought they were playing chess, I'd been playing 4D chess. My friend at the security company had been monitoring the situation remotely. With one phone call, those locks they'd changed right back. My lawyer friend had an emergency restraining order ready to file. My bank manager had already flagged any unauthorized account access. They locked me out of my house, but I'd locked them out of everything that mattered. The support network they never knew existed sprang into action like a well-oiled machine. Mrs. Chen had been documenting their comings and goings for weeks. Lisa had been researching tenant rights and property law. Amanda had been coordinating with my legal team. I wasn't just some helpless housewife they could manipulate. I was a financial advisor who'd helped dozens of clients escape toxic family situations. I knew exactly how this playbook worked. Within 2 hours of my declaration, the dominoes started falling. The police arrived with a trespassing warrant based on months of documented evidence. Martha's face when she saw the officers was priceless. Pure shock mixed with indignant rage. "You can't do this to us. We're family." "Ma'am, family doesn't give you the right to change someone else's locks," Officer Rodriguez explained patiently. "You're going to need to leave the premises immediately." George tried his pathetic pleading routine. "Where are we supposed to go? We're elderly. We have nowhere else." But I'd done my homework. "Actually, George, you have 3 options. The Sunset Manor apartments have availability. There's a senior living facility on Maple Street. Or you can contact your daughter in Phoenix who's been asking you to visit for months." Their belongings were removed by court order while I stood there with my arms crossed, finally feeling like myself again. 2 years of subtle manipulation and boundary violations, and it was over in one afternoon. But that's when David had to make his choice. Are you seeing who people really are when the masks come off? David stood in our driveway watching his parents load their possessions into a moving truck. Martha was screaming about ungrateful children and money-hungry wives. George was muttering about disrespect and family values. The neighbors were watching from their windows. "Rebecca," David said quietly, "they're my parents." "And I'm your wife," I replied. "The question is, which relationship are you willing to fight for?" Martha's mask had completely dropped by then. The sweet, helpful mother-in-law act was gone, replaced by pure venom. "You little gold digger! You think you can steal my son and kick us to the curb? We'll see about that." George's financial desperation was on full display, too. "That house has our equity in it. We put money into those renovations. You owe us." "Actually," I said, pulling out my documentation, "you never contributed a single dollar to this house, but you did illegally change the locks, transfer utilities without authorization, and establish residency without permission. That's fraud, trespassing, and identity theft." The truth was laid bare for everyone to see. David chose me, but the damage to our relationship was significant. Trust, once broken, doesn't rebuild overnight. The man I'd married had allowed his parents to invade our home, violate our privacy, and attempt to control our lives. Even though he eventually stood up to them, the fact that it took a legal intervention hurt, but my victory felt hollow. I'd won the battle, but at what cost? The extended family immediately took sides, and most of them weren't on mine. David's siblings blamed me for destroying the family. His cousins whispered about the heartless daughter-in-law who threw elderly parents out on the street. Social media became a battlefield. Martha launched a campaign painting me as a cruel, money-obsessed woman who'd manipulated her son into abandoning his family. The posts were carefully crafted to make me look like the villain and them like innocent victims. "Heartless daughter-in-law throws elderly parents out" became the narrative. Photos of Martha crying, stories about their homelessness, appeals for support from their church community. My professional reputation started taking hits. Clients began questioning whether someone who could turn on family could be trusted with their financial planning. Some even asked to be transferred to other advisors. Did I go too far? Did protecting my boundaries make me the bad guy? The guilt campaign was relentless. Family gatherings became impossible. Holidays turned into emotional minefields. David's sister would call crying about how broken their parents were. His brother would send passive-aggressive texts about family loyalty and forgiveness. Our marriage counseling sessions were painful. David understood intellectually that I'd done the right thing, but emotionally, he was wrestling with a lifetime of programming that told him family came first no matter what. "I know they were wrong," he'd say. "But they're old, Rebecca. They're my parents. Maybe we could have found another way." "What other way?" I'd ask. "They changed our locks, David. They locked me out of my own home. At what point does protecting yourself become acceptable? But the victory felt poisoned. I'd protected my home, but felt like I'd lost my family in the process. Then I discovered something that changed everything. David's sister called me crying, but this time it wasn't about blame. "Rebecca," she said, "I need to tell you something. This isn't the first time." She explained that Martha and George had pulled the same routine with her 10 years earlier. The temporary stay that became permanent, the boundary violations, the financial manipulation, the emotional blackmail. "I was too weak to fight back," she admitted. "I let them live with us for 3 years. It destroyed my marriage, my relationship with my kids, my mental health. When I finally kicked them out, they did the same thing, turned the whole family against me, made me look like the villain." This wasn't personal. It was pathological. Martha had a documented pattern of manipulating her children, exploiting their guilt, and establishing parasitic relationships. George had been just as much a victim, controlled and isolated for decades. David's childhood trauma explained everything: the people-pleasing, the inability to set boundaries, the crushing guilt whenever he prioritized his own needs. The pattern was clear. Martha would identify the child in the most vulnerable position, move in temporarily, then establish permanent control through emotional manipulation and financial dependency. "She tried it with our brother too," David's sister continued, "but his wife shut it down immediately. That's why they moved across the country, to get away from her reach." I wasn't the villain in this story. I was the first person strong enough to break the cycle. But Martha wasn't done with her games. She attempted reconciliation through fake medical emergencies designed to guilt David into letting them back in. "I'm having chest pains," she'd call, sobbing. "I think I'm having a heart attack. I just want to see my son one more time." David would rush to the hospital only to find her sitting up in bed, perfectly fine, asking when she could come home. George started approaching our neighbors, trying to turn them against me. "That woman kicked us out," he'd tell anyone who'd listen. "We raised that boy, put him through college, and she stole him from us." But Mrs. Chen had been watching everything. She started sharing her own documentation with other neighbors. "I saw them going into that house every day without permission," she'd tell anyone who asked. "They were using that poor girl's home like a hotel." The truth has a way of coming out. They would never stop trying. That was the reality I had to face. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with one legal victory. Martha's need for control was compulsive, pathological. She would keep probing for weaknesses, keep looking for ways back in. But I realized something important. This was never about winning versus losing. The real victory was breaking the cycle of abuse that had controlled David's family for generations. David was finally seeing his parents' toxic patterns clearly. In therapy, he began unpacking decades of emotional manipulation, the guilt trips, the financial control, the way Martha made him responsible for her emotional needs while never acknowledging his own. "I thought this was normal," he told our counselor. "I thought all families worked this way. I thought love meant never saying no." We had to make a choice. 3 options lay before us: maintain complete no contact to protect our marriage, establish limited contact with strict boundaries, or find a way to help them while maintaining our independence. After months of counseling and soul-searching, we chose a 4th option: kindness with boundaries. I helped them find appropriate senior housing, not out of guilt, but because it was the right thing to do. I wasn't their enemy. I was the person who refused to enable their dysfunction. We established a written contract about family visits. No more than twice a month, no surprise visits, no keys to our house, no overnight stays, no involvement in our financial decisions. David committed to ongoing therapy to address his childhood programming. Emergency contact protocols were clearly defined. Real emergencies would be handled through proper channels. Hospitals, emergency services, or other family members. Manufactured crises designed to manipulate us would be ignored. The transformation was remarkable. David evolved from an enabler who couldn't say no to a conscious partner who could love his parents while protecting his marriage. I went from feeling like a victim to becoming an empowered boundary setter who could show kindness without sacrificing self-respect. Martha and George had to learn new patterns too. They discovered that manipulation didn't work anymore, but genuine relationship building might. It was slow, painful progress, but progress nonetheless. I started a blog about family boundary setting, sharing my story and helping others escape similar situations. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of women dealing with toxic in-laws, controlling parents, and boundary-violating family members. Your home is your sanctuary, I wrote. Protect it. Your boundaries aren't suggestions, they're requirements. And kindness without boundaries isn't kindness at all. It's enabling. Our marriage emerged stronger than before. Crisis has a way of showing you what's really important. David learned to choose his wife over his parents' dysfunction. I learned that love sometimes means fighting for your relationship, even when it's uncomfortable. The blog became a support community, women sharing their stories, their strategies, their victories, and setbacks, practical advice about legal protections, emotional support for those struggling with guilt, and most importantly, the message that you're not alone in this fight. 6 months later, Martha sent me a card. "Thank you for helping us find our new place," it said. "It's nice to have our own space again." It wasn't an apology, but it was acknowledgement. Progress. Your home is your sanctuary. Protect it. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries, and the people who don't respect your boundaries don't truly love you. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is say no. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's dysfunction. Sometimes saving your family means being willing to lose some of its members. What would you protect your sanctuary from?